So, starting off with the Civilopedia tour here, we have all the technologies here. So, some of these are new, like animal husbandry. That's going much further into the past than the older Civilization games, which presumed that you already had agriculture, animal and otherwise. Speaking of that, there's agriculture. In Civilization 4, you even have to develop hunting. If we find that here, and then you can start developing an actual civilization. Other changes, you have biology as a distinct technology. You have a civil service. You have compass instead of magnetism. Composites. Plastics aren't actually on the... Oh, actually, no, plastics are on the list. So the composites and plastics are separate. And then priesthood is distinct from religion. And religion isn't even on the list. There are simply parts of religion, like divine right or mysticism. Ceremonial burial's not on here, strangely enough. Then there are guilds, basically medieval labor unions. Strangely enough, labor union is not on the list. Liberalism is, even though there isn't a distinctive liberal government. Instead, you can develop other things like free speech or freedom of religion. These are the civic values that are introduced in Civilization 4, which are much more complex than simple governments in previous versions of Civilization. Paper and the printing press are distinct advances. Radio is still on the list. And mass media is also new. That presumes basically film and television and so on. Fascism is distinct from despotism. And then, what else have we got that's new here? Mining, that's not a given at the beginning of the game, as in previous versions of Civilization. Optics is distinct. The theory of gravity is missing, as is atomic theory. It's not even a matter of classical mechanics or quantum mechanics. They don't have either of them on the list, strangely enough. Physics is on the list. And replaceable parts, which basically means interchangeable parts. That enables some new technologies like rifling and steam power. Rifling allows you to build riflemen, which is different from conscription leading to that. Strangely enough, conscription isn't on the list, although you do need certain technologies in order to do conscription, because conscription is actually a policy that you can introduce in Civilization 4. It's more sophisticated than in previous versions of the game. Education is separate from the university. And in fact, if you look carefully, university isn't even on the list. University is enabled with it, though. The Oxford University Wonder as well. Music is an advance now, as is drama. These contribute to the cultural output of your cities and your civilization, which do matter. It gives you greater influence, soft power, and so on. So, in general, these buildings reflect the much more sophisticated nature of Civilization 4 compared to previous ones. Now, the units, a lot of them are familiar. The Axeman is, I think, new. at least in this form. There are a whole bunch of units distinct to nations in Civilization 4 that you can only build if you're a particular civilization. So the Cossack is for the Russians, partly because you don't have the Ukrainians, so it replaces your cavalry if you're the Russians. The principle of nation-specific units was introduced in Civilization 3, but most of the units have been changed for 4. Camel archers are distinct to the Arab nation. So, they're being distinct to the Arabs, they replace the knight. You also have upgrades to the basic archer, because you have this primitive archer. And then you have a longbowman for the Middle Ages, and then you have a crossbowman for the Renaissance. The cruisers missing from your naval units. You do have destroyers, battleships, carriers, and then the older ones like the frigate and the galleon. The galley more or less replaces the trireme. And you also have missionaries to promote different religions because of the concept of the religious victory. So you want to spread your religious influence. You have a modernized tank, modern armor, to replace your original tank. This is another carryover from Civilization 3. You have a machine gun unit for defending positions. So it says it can only defend. It's basically a World War I infantryman. Also, one of the things you can see here are all the promotions that you can give units in Civilization 4 that never used to exist. It used to be you could just build veteran units or basic units, and a more basic unit could be upgraded to veteran upon a combat victory. But in Civilization 4, it's much more sophisticated, and different units can get different promotions. Like, for example, the bomber can't get any, if you notice. Then they point to buildings you can build. So you have the broadcast tower. I'm actually fond of this one. You can build bomb shelters, bunkers, and castles to fortify your cities better. You can also build parochial schools like a Confucian Academy, for example. You can build hospitals, just like in Civilization 3, although you have more benefits from them, because health is actually measured tangibly in Civilization 4, so it pushes your health up, of course. Jail takes the place of police station. Before you have factories, you can build forges in the pre-industrial era, which can then be supplemented with ironworks later on in the game. And, of course, for cultural purposes, you have theaters, for example, which are distinct from coliseums. You can see you get happiness from them, but you also get culture, measured by little musical notes. And then you have the wonders of the world, which you get a fair choice of them, including rock and roll. Rock and roll is actually a wonder. Then you have the terrain features and the terrain explained. You have natural resources, which are very important, as I've said before, and they include cultural resources because you can develop the countryside outside of the cities with improvements. I'll get to these next.